We'd like to welcome you all to this edition of the Smarter Money Moves series. Will your financial planning evolve as you do? I'm Kate Parker, and it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter, James Brewer. James, also known as JB, is founder and CEO of Envision Wealth Planning. Envision has been named to Expertise's Best Financial Advisors in Chicago 4 years in a row. He is a personal finance contributor to Forbes.com. He is a certified financial planner considered by most the gold standard in financial planning. He is a chartered divorce financial analyst and college funding and student loan advisor, among others. He co-authored Individual Biases in Retirement Planning and Wealth Management Financial Behavior, published by Oxford University Press. He has an MBA SM from the Sloan School at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and it is my pleasure to welcome JB.
Well, thanks for that great introduction. Hopefully you can hear me, and it's my pleasure to be presenting this evening. Before I get too deep into the presentation, there may be questions along the way. I had asked you to please use the Q&A function and not the chat function, the question and answer functionality. And if we don't get to all the questions by the end, I will do my best to answer them through email when this is over. Tonight's purpose is to help you understand what financial planning means at Envision Wealth Planning, go over our passion, explain what Envisioneering financial life planning means, and also help you understand our tiers of service by using some specific examples. Well, our passion is helping people pursue money freedom through smarter money moves. Pursue money freedom through smarter money moves aligned with your values. You know, live is always wonderful with your technical difficulties and having things move along. So hopefully we will figure this out quickly. Fortunately. One of the things that I believe makes us different is we start by understanding what your values, goals, and passions are. Your values, goals, and passions. That, along with your relationships and your money mindset, is what helps to define who you are and exactly what your why is. And then, once we understand all that, we start to look at your income and expenses. For most people, it's the income and expenses by which you can actually have savings that can eventually turn into assets. But somewhere along the way, there's this thing called liabilities or debt, sometimes it's loans, and then that ends up getting in the way of you being able to build assets. The assets is the kind of the last thing that we typically ask our people about. But it's that entire picture that actually creates that holistic view of you. Regarding our tiers of service, we have three, call it Pro, Advanced, and Premium. In Pro, it's a means-based planning, where there we're talking about income replacement rather than
sorry for disturbing your
planning, which
I try to let you know something you're really fast. So I was KMITD, or just KMITD. Forget K, it says MITD.
Sorry about that, another technical difficulty. Again, live. So means-based planning, that is when we actually look at income replacement rather than trying to have goals. Some of this will become more evident as we move forward. It has lower complexity typically, and we're considering fewer money issues, and we don't include debt or insurance. Then there's advanced. It's goals-based planning with a bit higher complexity. We consider more money or have more money considerations. We look at your debt, disability, life, and long-term care planning. And then finally, premium. Again, that's goals-based planning where we're adding on top of what we're going to call your needs or your basic expenses. It's the highest complexity with the most money steps, with disability, life insurance, and long-term care planning included. And it may include more complex issues such as retirement income and estate planning. So let's look at a case using Envisioneering Pro, where the income typically is going to be somewhere between $40,000 to $74,000, and we'll deliver this through 4 meetings in the first year. So let's look at Roberta, female, age 42, employed, making $60,000, who's single, living in the state of Illinois. So we have to ask the question, how long will she live in retirement? She wants to retire at age 65. We project her living to 93. That means that her money's going to have to last 29 years. 29 years. Now, many people say, hey, I'm not going to live that long. For whatever reason, they say they want to live that long, and usually it's because they assume a degradation of their health. Well, we do have a life expectancy calculator because potentially they may even live longer than that date, or maybe it's something in their family history or their health suggests a shorter time period. But we don't want them to run out of money. And then finally here at the bottom, we see the default total living expense and something called default basic living expense. Let's examine. Well, in the Pro tier, that's what we're looking at right now, we use default total living expenses, which basically is taking your employment and other income, subtracting federal and state taxes, subtracting FICA taxes, and subtracting an 11.5% assumed savings rate. And that's the amount of cash needed to maintain the current standard of living. In advanced, we take a different approach, 60% being a basic living expense, and then on top of that, we begin to add lifestyle goals, travel, home improvements, let's call it college education. So notice across the top here, we have some nice colored bars. So our colored bars is the before retirement and then when she's retired. So we see the time periods. But look down here where we see the dollar amount. So in this case, $40,000 is what we're expecting that she'll need per year, which is about 2/3 of the current dollar amount of her income. Also notice that we have inflation that we're calculating at 2%, and whether or not she would change her state of residence or retirement. Some states may not have state income tax, such today as Florida and Texas, but I once lived in Connecticut. When I moved there, they didn't have a state tax. Shortly thereafter, they did. So potentially that's not always a guarantee of the future. But keep in mind that inflation of 2% because we're going to look at that a bit later. Then we have these money considerations or steps, if you want to call them that. In this case, Social Security, retirement income, linked assets, investment assets. Linked assets are essentially when you take the amount, it could be your 401k or IRA, and you actually link it to your account. That is the best way to have us help you because we are getting an ongoing increase or decrease of those amounts. Whereas if we're putting it hard-coded, we have to keep doing that in case there's some significant fluctuations. And ideally that fluctuations because you're adding money to it. And then finally, other assets. So let's look at Roberta. She is eligible to receive Social Security. She's believing she's going to take it at age 65. First year benefit would be $21,761 and a lifetime of $631,000. Not bad. We see that she doesn't have any other sources of income during retirement, such as pensions or rental income. But she has been saving in a 401k, and it looks like a rollover at some point in her life based upon the $150,000 value in her current value of the traditional IRA. The $3,600 could be both her contribution as well as the contribution from her employer, for a total of $7,800 in annual additions. If she had other assets, we could have added them, such as a home, business and property, pension and deferred compensation, cash value life insurance policies, 529 plans if you have children, pensions and deferred compensation, future assets such as cash and property. Some people expect to get an inheritance at some point in the future. I always caution with inheritances because unless you actually have a document, it may not pay out the way that you expected, and you may not be the heir that you thought that you were going to be either. One thing that we also might have a note on is unless you're going to sell your house, it may not actually turn into cash. Here we have a risk assessment. We'll talk about that a bit later, but risk is always one of those factors that we talk about, especially when we're going to be investing the monies that we have. So now as we've moved on, we have this big question. And basically it's, will you have enough money so that you won't run out, or sometimes run short versus run out? So we use this thing called Monte Carlo simulation. We run 1,000 trials of your plan using 1,000 different return possibilities to calculate the probability that your plan will be successful. Well, inside of that Monte Carlo simulation, there are a couple of things going on. And one is we simply look as a yes or no. So if in the trial, it was, in her case, $39,000, she would have been $1,000 off of the 40. So that would have been a failure. If she had $41,000, that would have been a success. On average, you might say she got 40, but in the case of Monte Carlo, there was a success and a failure. But the failure could be as bad as $1 and the success as good as $80,000. Typically, the swings aren't going to be that wide, but I'm trying to make the point on how it works. But you'd rather see more successes than failures. So in her case, based upon the facts so far, she had 170 successes out of 1,000 trials, or 17%. I preferably like to see her in the green zone than rather to see her in the purple here. So let's keep going and see what we might find out. Well, already in the recommended scenario, we see an 86% probability of success. We try to be messengers of hope. We don't always get to be so hopeful so quickly, so let's see how we got there. So on the left-hand side, you'll note that there are some things called strategies. You see Social Security and risk and reward. Later, we see options, choices, play zone, what if worksheet, and super solve. We're going to examine play zone later. The other are actually things that the advisor, let's call it driving the car, would be using to try to help increase this probability of success. So when we examine Social Security, you'll see across the top that there are actually multiple Social Security strategies. If we look from 2 to 5, we see that one could be as soon as possible, at retirement, or at full retirement age, that's what the FRA stands for, or at age 70. You'll see that, I'm going to jump down actually, because personally I like to look at the probability of success. So you might recall that we had read that she was getting 631 on the Social Security that we looked at earlier, but it actually didn't equate to a probability of success. We see 86, 76. This 86 is repeating the strategy used in scenario 1. If she waited till full retirement age, it would be 88. And if she waited to age 70, 90%. Well, 90 is definitely bigger than 76. It's bigger than 88. It's bigger than 86. But maybe she would say that the 4 percentage point difference isn't enough for her to decide that she wants to wait to age 70 and she'd rather take it now, or even at the full retirement age, which is 2 years later. So all of this is someone's choice, and there may be other things in the plan that we may decide are better for her to actually, or she may decide is better for her. So now let's move on to our advanced case. Here, the income is typically 75 to 149,000, not always, because sometimes people may have a more complex or a less complex case. We see that it says goal-based planning and delivered through 4 Envisioneering meetings. So in our plan, we see that it says advanced, and now we have a couple. And our couple is male, female, employed, age 40, I should say age 40, with an employment income of $60,000, married in the state of Illinois. Now, I want you to recall that we looked at Pro before, and that you notice across the top that we see a couple of things rather than the addition of something called protection in this case. So what is that going to mean to us later? We'll actually examine what protection means when we get to the recommended scenario. But now you're going to quickly notice that we've added some additional features that are available with our advanced cases. They actually have 2 children, 10 and age 12. We can see that they've got some expectations for their retirement and concerns. They want not to work and have an active lifestyle, but they have some concerns about Alzheimer's, a bit about not having a paycheck, no work and no paycheck. That's kind of a new phenomenon for most people. And we see that they are represented by these blue and green colors, so we can discern between our 2 people. So they want to retire at age 65. We have them living to 97 and 100 respectively. Their money needs now to last for 36 years. Now that's really long, and you know, a lot of people are struggling sometimes with seeing numbers such as 100, but increasingly more people are hitting these numbers. My mom is 91, who didn't think she'd live this long, but fortunately she still lives alone. So a lot of times, you know, these advanced agers aren't the expectations that many people might have for someone in that advanced age, and who knows what additional things we're going to cure. So now let's look at this concept of goals. You see lots of things here, from travel to major purchase, cars, bequests, homes, private schools, college, etc. In their case, we've categorized things according to needs, wants, and wishes. So needs is that kind of basic living expense, but they have a want of their child going to college and some extra living expenses. Well, You might have said, well, hey, what happened to the other child? Well, the screen just cut it off. But on this, we have an ability to look at their goal importance summary as a continuum from, say, 10 to 1, with the retirement basic living expense being at the 10, the college education for the two children, they have it equal, and they'd be willing to cut back on the extra living expense. But let's see if we can't avoid them needing to have to cut back on their wishes of this extra living expense. So you might recall we looked at Roberta that we only had 2 colors when we looked at the retirement timeline. Here we actually have 3. And the dark blue is something new for us, and that would be Mary retired alone, because we had Doug passing on in 97. Mary still lived for 3 more years. And we look deeper, we see that the dollar amount for the basic, I'm saying basic expenses, not the extra stuff they wanted to do, is reduced from $4,000 to about $3,000. Now, I often talk to people who do have pensions, and they will tell me sometimes that there's a spousal benefit of half of what the combined dollar amount was. Well, quickly here you see that the basic expenses, or we could call them needs, haven't cut by half. They're actually really down more like, I don't know, 75% roughly of the $4,000. So we need to be thinking about how are we going to make up that difference if indeed that is the case from pension, or if there are simply assets, how are we going to still pay that dollar amount? So those are some planning issues that we help people address. Again, we see our inflation number at 2%. One of the ways to make the plan even better is to have your own budget. You can also think of a retirement budget versus the budget you currently have. So we can actually plug that in rather than taking the system's expected expenses. Sometimes there are people who have different ideas of what basic is and could be higher or lower of what that number is. So we're looking at the children and how they might fund that. But we always have to think that we're multiplying by 4. I'm using the second born versus the firstborn. So it's multiplying whatever the number we see, which in this case was a public and state. If it was a private school, it'd probably be closer to 52,000. I know another case that's in the 80s. So these private schools can be very expensive, and depending upon the income of the parents, the schools may expect a higher expected family contribution. Notice here that inflation is not 2%, it's actually 5.8%. It's 5.8%. So inflation is this kind of rising cost of items. Every item usually doesn't rise at the same. With inflation, we were expecting 2%, and here we've been expecting 5.8, let's call it 6. So unfortunately, inflation for college has been this way for a while. Don't know when it's ever going to stop, but it has been giving many people sticker shock as they see that these costs continue to rise. So we need to keep that in mind if we're planning, especially trying to save for or even figure out how we might be paying for this out of income and trying to avoid student loans. So if you recall from Pro that we considered Social Security, retirement income, investment assets, and other assets, when we move to our advanced, we add to that. So we see that we also have insurance and stock options. Let's see if I get my mouse to move here. Yes, insurance and stock options, as well as restricted stock, liabilities, net worth, to be our money steps. So now let's look at Doug and Mary again. I made them pretty equal, so their first year benefit is the same, but now they have a 1.6 total lifetime benefit. They don't have a pension or rental income. They do have 401ks, apparently a rollover from the past, but notice too that we could have added things such as other employer retirement plans like a CEP or a simple individual retirement accounts, annuities and tax deferred products, taxable and or tax-free accounts, college savings plans. Now let's move on to insurance policies. They have some group term on one and some term life on both of them, but we could also add cash value policies owned by the client, owned in a trust, more non-cash value life policies, other insurance policies such as disability. Here we have group and personal, long-term care, Medicare, property and casualty, and health as well. So we can model pretty much their entire life as people's lives get more complex. Then let's consider the liabilities or debts. Here we have credit card and student loans. It's best to put in monthly payments, but sometimes people will say that they pay the balance off every month. Hard to believe in this case that they would be paying $12,000 off given their income, but I guess anything's possible, maybe a gift from someplace, but they do have a student loan here that needs to be paid as well. We can add things like real estate loans, so if they did have a house, car loans, business loans, other personal debts. Returning to the risk assessment questionnaire, here's a little bit of a window into the one that's built into the MoneyGuide Pro software. We actually have another one that we use as well. We discover that different questionnaires might give us different answers based upon how the prospect or client absorbs them. So we want to make sure that we kind of have a double check on that to understand what I would refer to as their natural risk tolerance, which may not be the need tolerance or how much risk they need to take in order to reach their goals. And we'll examine that as we go through. Finally, we've gotten to the same question. And they fund their goals. And here we've got a very interesting pattern of red, but we have 0% that know they won't be able to do so in their current scenario. So how can we help them? Looking at Pro for a moment, we had strategies that had Social Security and risk and reward. But in this case, we've added some things. On the strategy side, we see there's something called buckets, secure income and total income. That's really more for retirement income planning, and we're a bit far out with this particular couple to start to use those, but those are there for us. And you see protection and insurance down here, both circled. With protection, it's actually looking more deeply into life insurance, policies they own now. But our big question is, what happens if Doug dies early? The outcome may depend upon how early. Then we also can look at disability and long-term care planning to see how those may negatively impact and what they have today or what they may need to try to offset those. And I always tell people, you know, while insurance is a way to fund things, it doesn't necessarily provide a plan. So it's good to have a plan, and the plan may or may not be funded with insurance, but we can't assume that events won't happen. So we have something interesting with a married couple. Now we have two people who are actually eligible in this case. So total lifetime benefits, we see as some varied numbers. But it also includes some extra strategies where one could claim at one time and the other one could claim at a different time. In this case, Doug begins at age 70, Mary begins at her full retirement age, or they could wait to age 70. So we would be weighing what the best answer for them is, but sometimes that has to do with other factors. We saw that we had risk reward as one of our options. There are people who sometimes say, well, JB, can't you just make it up from investments? He says, well, I wish that I could have that magic wand, but unfortunately, that's not always such an easy fix. So in this case, we see that the probability of success, if they take the most risky, only gets them up to 2%. So it looks like there are some other things that will give them a better answer. I also wanted to caution too, when people sometimes think about, well, just taking on more risk, because, and sometimes they're really thinking, well, get me more return. But in this case, you know, an all stock, or sometimes referred to as equity portfolio, the S&P 500 often is the benchmark for that, was actually down 51% at one point. So a lot of people didn't like it down 51% and decided to get out rather than stay in. So sometimes that's not really the answer either. So now I'm going to take you into something that's called the play zone. The play zone. What I would say, it's more of a place to start to get a feel for the various levers that one might look at to change the outcome. So right now you'll see how as I move it down, the goals, their retirement age, the need expenses, the wants, and their wishes. So usually most of the time, people don't want to change those items because that's the why they're doing it typically. So let's look at savings as one of our levers to change things. So we see today that they are doing 3% and getting a company match. Well, I know that they're getting a company match because I put together this scenario, so know that they're getting a company match. And then it does say we could click this thing called max over here, but I'd like to clear up that max doesn't mean getting all of your match. Max means what the government allows, which this year is $19,500. There's some other factors that might reduce that, but $19,500. But based upon their income, I don't think that max necessarily makes the most sense. So let's see if we actually increased that amount to, let's say, 10%. For Doug, see if that, oh, that doesn't move the needle. Let's see if we can go to 10% with Miri and her employer. Let's see, so 10% roughly on them both making $6,000. Well, $60,000 is only about $6,000. So what if we went a bit higher? And higher could simply mean that there is a company match, or maybe it's a secondary company match, where they're not fully taking advantage of. A lot of people just kind of stop at 3% for many different reasons. So let's take them up to 15%. See what that does for us. Well, looks like there is some more work that's still to be done, but I'm going to look to their risk and return. So what if we actually decided that, or they say that they could handle the risk of moving up to, say, all stock, but let's make it, let's say, moderate for their, oh, well, geez, we're starting to make some progress here. Starting to make some progress. Let's see if I can change things a bit more. Let's go back and look at some of their expenses. Well, maybe they would be willing to work longer. So when you work longer, that gives you the ability to put more savings in. So we move them up to 15%. So now we could just have them go putting 15% in longer. What if we tried to go to 870 with both of them? Wow. Well, let's see what's the next thing we could potentially do, and let's look at their expenses. I don't think it's wise to actually do much with the basic living expenses, but you'll see here that there is some disparity between the two children. They actually were thinking that the oldest would go to private school, many different reasons, let's assume, but what if we said, hey, you know, maybe it's okay if the parents decided that all they could decide to try to afford was $25,890. That's looking better. That's looking better. And maybe 20,000 instead of 32,000. So we've actually gone from 0 to 76% with these changes. We're still providing meaningful dollars to the children. In this case, the parents are saying we're going to fund $25,890, in this case, out of assets, not necessarily out of income. So there's still a way to pay off the other money. Maybe there's some scholarships, maybe there's some student loans, but we need to make sure that the children don't end up needing to feel as though that they have to take care of parents. So that's a bit how we can use our play zone. So I'm going to go in here and say that we want to save that as our recommended scenario. So now we've changed that to the recommended scenario. So now I'm going to move us to what are you afraid of? Now, one thing that probably wasn't evident. So you see the 76% that we were looking at before, it's in the far right column under needs, wants, and wishes. So the 76% in the recommended scenario actually was to try to give them all that they wanted. Under needs, they had 99% don't think that this couple would be thrilled about just only having their needs funded. So the needs and wants only, that would be, as we see now, funding the children education and still getting their wishes. It still looks pretty good, and there's some factors that we don't know in the future that actually may push this number up, but I do like the fact that we are definitely in the green zone. But maybe there's some things to be afraid of. Maybe there's some things to be afraid of. So that it says, what are you afraid of here? What about a Great Recession loss? High inflation, Social Security cuts. Many people are concerned about that. Low returns, dying early or living long, healthcare and long-term care. Let's look at some. So if you recall from our other example that I mentioned, that the Great Recession return decreased at some point 51%. It was down 51%. People always seem to like the long-term average, but they don't like individual periods of that long term. So what if we added that percentage loss? And now we see that the needs and wants go to 48, the wants and wishes go down to 28. That's not insignificant. That's not insignificant. Sorry, I meant to go up. So things to be concerned about, right? We had 92 and 76. 92 and 76 is now 48 and 28. Maybe they may want to rethink the amount of risk they're actually willing to take. So now let's look at the 99 to 92 and 76 again. We're looking now about the die early, live long. Right now we have them living to the expectation that we showed earlier. But what happens if Doug happens to die 41? I didn't intend for this to be the case, the same age that Kobe Bryant died. His daughter was even 13, I believe. So we just never believe that it's going to happen to people under a certain age, but we just never know. So in this case, based upon the current state of the plan as we know it, now the needs go down, which now is really falling on Mary, down to 72 from the 99, and we see what that does to the other element. So probably should try to do some planning to avoid that becoming a problem. And then there's Social Security cuts, so I put in a 50% reduction. What does that look like? Still pretty good on the needs and wants, not too bad, but on the wishes, it's starting to not look so hot. So not sure what to do there other than to call your congressperson and try to help make sure that that doesn't go away, or at least be cut by 50%. We can model other reductions as well. So now finally, premium. In this case, 150,000 and more in income, goals-based retirement planning delivered over 5 meetings, more work for the planners, or as I like to call myself, financial life architect, to do behind the scenes. $200,000 for the wife, $90,000 for the husband. They're married, living in Illinois, age 35. Age 35, wow, pretty good. We see the goals at the top. We've selected retirement basic living expense. They want to also call out their medical health care. This is, sometimes people want to retire even earlier than when they're going to receive Medicare. So in that case, it's definitely important to make sure that you're modeling that and how are you going to cover that expense, which seems to always be on the rise. Then there's travel that they want to do and some extra living expense. But notice down here that the number for basic is $83,000. We have more that we could talk about regarding risk, from the assessment to the current allocations, something called the model portfolio table, and a composite portfolio analysis. Just giving you a quick example here. You'll see there's some names that go down the name column. Let's not concern ourselves with that too much, other than there's something where we can create portfolios of a certain mixture of stocks, bonds, and cash. In the first one, it's 74.5% on 25% stock. The green shows you what the risk and what's called standard deviation. That's just a measure of how much the returns vary. So could be kind of plus 3.47 or minus 3.47 on the 4.27 side. We'll save the conversation, the complete conversation on standard deviation for another day. this is only a quick example. There's a lot more to it than what I just said there. Moderate, we see that changes. And then finally, equity, which we have looked at. And while a lot of people might like the 7% return, which is higher than the others, we saw that it came with a 50% reduction. And to be fair, the 50% reduction was something we did in the past. We've been looking at projected returns, which most experts believe the future returns won't be as high as our past returns, but still, I would expect that the equity compared to the others will have the most volatility or up and down movements in it. So one way we can look at risk and reward, which is what was circled there before, is that sometimes we can come into risk and reward as, which was different than what our case with Advance was, but we can see that there's a higher probability of success. In their particular case, going from going from defensive to conservative gets them up 4 percentage points all the way up to 66. So that might be a place where they want to look. Again, I still caution that you have that volatility argument, and can you really stick with it? And that's a whole nother conversation, which I think has to be informed by better education on investing, which I plan to do in the future. And then finally, let's look at something where we can add estate planning on top of it for an even more complex case. Most people don't have any estate planning done. I happen to write an article for Forbes.com on the issue of estate planning, highlighting Prince and Aretha Franklin and what happened when they didn't have a plan. For a lot of people, they believe that having more assets is the reason to have a complete asset plan or a complete estate plan. I'd say that everyone should have a plan so that your heirs actually know what your true intentions were. In some cases, we need to model that to consider taxes and how assets might be split. In other cases, we don't, but we do have that capability when that need arises. So I'd like to make a couple offers to you this evening. And the first is a complimentary one that I'm going to send a link to you in the chat box in a moment. And it has to do with something called MyBlocks. And in MyBlocks, it kind of breaks down several of the components that I have kind of quickly talked about this evening. One that I find particularly interesting is, there's kind of a quiz called What Did It Cost and What Will It Cost? If you've got a friend, you may want to compete on who gets the most right answers, and it goes through prices in the past and what the price, what you might think the price will be in the future. So what will it cost? But it actually is a way to help you understand inflation and how different things inflate. Retirement bliss is something for couples that they can see how closely aligned they are with various elements of what their expectations are for retirement. We have questions about expectations and concerns and some basic retirement forecasting. Learn more about Social Security, healthcare, long-term care, inflation, financial concerns and financial goals. Everyone's not in the mindset of, hey, I'm thinking about retirement, although I'd say the sooner you think about it, the better. Then some practical elements of paying off credit cards and college loans, emergency funds, etc. And there's a service called Yodlee. Typically clients would actually be using this one, where you're going to connect your accounts and it can provide some expense analysis and budgeting and help you look at your transactions and help ideally with some better money management habits. So when you click the link, you are going to be sent to this client portal login. You'll be able to register yourself. If you're a client, the login would be login, but here you'll be self-registering yourself, and it is complimentary for you to take advantage of that. If you end up becoming a client, there's even more that we can do with the service, as it'll tie into the software that I showed you in the majority of the presentation. If you find yourself saying, you know, what I've seen tonight appears to be something that I really would like to learn more about, and you want to learn about our Envisioneering financial life planning process, which starts with a visualized meeting. We help you get organized, and we analyze your information, look for ways to optimize it, especially from a tax perspective, which can take the largest bite out of your assets. Then we implement or activize the plan, and because nothing ever stands still, we help you modernize the plan on an ongoing basis. If you want to take advantage of that, I would have you either answer the email that came to you earlier. There's going to be a kind of a thank you, and you'll be able to get this on replay later. Or you could simply go to our website. There's an info at envisionwealth.us that you could talk to us through there. There's a contact us form, and note that we are based in Chicago and in Newark, Delaware, and we do have people that we service across the country in markets through virtual meetings that look similar to this, except without a bunch of other people on the line. So now we have a bit of time for some questions. I'll look at the Q&A.
So this is Kate back on again, and if you have questions, please use the Q&A function to ask them. The chat function, is that right, Jay?
You want to use the Q&A function.
Okay. And questions we don't answer during this webinar will be answered by email. Right at the top of your screen, there's a Q&A function.
Well, so far I haven't seen any questions come in, so maybe it's the time of the day, but I don't want to keep people on while we wait. You can simply email us outside of this.
Okay. Well, we want to thank everyone for attending. Please don't forget to take advantage of the complimentary offer to test drive MyBlocks. If you'd like to learn more about Envision's financial life planning process, please email info@envisionwealth.us, or you can sign up on the Contact Us page on our website. JB, thank you so much for your expertise, and thanks to everyone for attending tonight. Have a wonderful night.